we often forget that our home is the Dhamma. Wherever we go, as long as we remember it as such, we're always home. But there is this nagging feeling that we have because so long as we're alive and we have these six senses, we're always getting data. And because of the presence of the defilements, excuse me, we often ask ourselves, put certain expectations on ourselves as to things have to be a certain way. But why do my situations and my expectations of them have to be perfect in order for me to be okay with myself, with life? So often we add this bag or container size mass of information, data from different spiritual traditions, in this case Buddhism, to kind of address these emotional hot buttons that we cannot avoid. But we try to create this subterfuge, if you will. And what we neglect to do is watch the subtle desire to change things, to secretly want things to be otherwise, to somehow alter our situations to something better, which deep down, viscerally, subconsciously, or consciously, we see as the thing which will provide us with happiness, contentment. So we count the milliseconds until the difficult and painful experiences are no more. Until outside and inner circumstances start changing. Until these difficult times, painful experiences, whether in the body or outside circumstances or conditions, start to change. Sooner or later, preferably sooner, but this is the dialogue, this is the impetus, this is the drive that we have within us. Intellectually, consciously, cognitively, we might understand and appreciate the role of dukkha or suffering or stress or unsatisfactoriness, but that means little when we are in the middle of things that are uncomfortable. So we go ahead and have this, argument with ourselves that I understand dukkha, I shouldn't be suffering. I understand suffering, so therefore I shouldn't experience suffering. But the Buddha never said or promised us that the moment we see dukkha intellectually, cognitively, then suddenly it would magically disappear. We become somehow superhuman, no longer susceptible to dukkha, dissatisfactory, unsatisfactory nature of life. But then we look at our hands, we look at ourselves in the mirror, and we see this thing, which the Buddha termed mentality and materiality, Nāma-Rupa. which happens to be one of the 5 aggregates that makes up a human being, a functioning human being, alive. But we don't normally think about it. We don't normally even give it a time of day to even consider it, that it is there, it is present. And for that, the Buddha also encouraged us to contemplate death, something that in our culture, in the world today, is again still something that we want to shun, avoid, sugarcoat. So the Buddha always encouraged those bhikkhus, those practitioners who were able to put death in the crosshairs of their living experience, especially those who were practicing marananusati, which is contemplation or mindfulness of death. In part of the suttas, the Buddha calls some of the bhikkhus over who have collectively said that they were practitioners of contemplation of death. So the Buddha addresses them by asking the question as to how does each one do it, contemplate death? And it goes from, let's say, a person who would do it the whole day, the culmination of that being something that brings one closer to nibbana, experiencing of arahantship. The inevitability factor is introduced with the death contemplation. So each one, in their own understanding, in their own way, addresses it until the Buddha comes to the person who just is very tiny little portion of the breath. Already it is completely tinged, drenched in the contemplation of death, and the Buddha applauds that person. That means every heartbeat is echoing with death. Not celebrating death, but completely cognizant, aware, in the know of the inevitability of death. For such a person, when they look at their hand, themselves in the mirror, every moment they're seeing mentality and materiality coming into being. They're pausing for a few not even milliseconds, of course, and then disappearing constantly. So there is nothing to hold on to. So there's no time for inner dialogue, you see. So the imminence, the imminent factor of death becomes such a powerful tool in the practice of meditation. Otherwise, the information coming in from the outside world is often quite compelling for us to be dragged away from this sense of, wait a minute, what am I keeping this body for? Bending over backwards, trying to give it so much comfort to make sure it's perfect, and then I would be happy. After that, only when these conditions are right. Well, we all know that that's never going to happen continuously, or at least even for an extended period of time. There's always so many inevitable, unpredictable, uncontrollable factors at play. But what is Rupa? What is Nama? I like to think of Rupa being the unavoidable part of this thing that we call us, the body. Unavoidable because it is the result of our past kammas, past actions, the fruits of which is now the embodiment that we call Rupa. And then we look at Nama. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Nama is, or the mentality part, is the avoidable part. Now, when I say unavoidable and avoidable, what am I referring to? The avoidability, I guess, and the unavoidability of dukkha. So what do we really have control over? Aha, the habitual patterns, which is brought in the package that we call nama, or mentality, versus rupa, which is the materiality, which is made up of the four great elements. According, again, I'm coming from the perspective of the Dhamma, Theravada tradition. The things that we inherit from our parents, and all that. But what is mentality? Well, the Buddha breaks it down into feeling, perception, or associations or memories, I like to call them, volition, the contact part, and the attention. Volition can sometimes also be called intention. So you have all these five playing a role in keeping the rupa behave in a certain manner, be in a certain manner, dictating what the rupa will end up being seen as. So if one's attention is constantly on, I'm holding this, I'm wearing this body, it's in pain, it's in suffering, so it dwells on it, right? So whatever we constantly think about, that becomes our reality, right? So the mind goes ahead and builds up all these associations thanks to selective ways of thinking and picking out only those items that fits the narrative of the attention being on negative, let's say, using that example, scenarios. So it catches itself continually in this state of feeling, the state of despair, sadness, depression. So you're in this vicious cycle. And because we have this evolutionarily present negative bias, we are caught in this endless hamster wheel of suffering. So long as we just let it be like that, and we don't take control of the steering wheel. So in other words, understanding Nama and Rupa, mentality and materiality, allows us to get back into the control seat, the driver's seat of our lives. And the way we do that is by intelligently, with wisdom, looking at meditation from a better understanding of where mentality and materiality fall into the grand scheme of things, vis-a-vis suffering, experiencing of suffering. So on one end, we look at the body and we see, let's say, if the legs are broken, if there's this big gashing wound, or if there is this illness, cancer, or something that is screaming at us with loudspeaker, the inevitability of death. When we approach it with a little bit better understanding by using the framework of Nama and Rupa, mentality and materiality, all of a sudden we see that, hey, the body is there, the biological, biochemical part of what I consider to be me. And that is the result of kamma. Okay, now am I getting the wound stitched up, sutured up, going to the emergency room and taking care of this situation. My legs are broken. I just had an accident. Da, 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 da. Okay, are medical professionals giving it the attention it deserves? Okay, so I'm taking care of it as much as I can, as best as I can. There's no need to add more suffering, of course. Of course, there's pain involved, physical pain. However, when the mind is let loose, in a sense, the doors are off the hinges, and any kind of thoughts are coming through in droves, in like a Niagara. They're flowing in, unchecked. That's when dukkha really becomes dukkha, as far as this tradition goes and the teachings go. Because one part is unavoidable. The pain, the physical pain is unavoidable. And that, again, as far as the Dhamma is concerned, to my understanding, is the result of the past actions. Now, the other thing, what we do with that pain, with that suffering of the body, is crucial, is very important. Now, when Corona first started, people were coming in. I was talking with them, and all these valid concerns were coming up, and people were all over the place in their heads. And when I asked the very simple question of, do you think we're going to live forever? The natural response is, shrugging of the shoulders, just like, of course not. Of course not. Of course. What does that mean? Of course not. How is that connected to the Nama portion of the Nāma-Rupa formula? The mentality part. Even though the person cognitively is saying, verbally communicating, they don't buy into it, but they definitely do, because the feeling is definitely drenched, glued in ignorance, with ignorance. The intention or volition, the attention, the perception, the contact, everything that contacts their six senses is dragging them down further and further into more despair. And that's why, as Buddhist teachers, when we, at least some of us, when we highlight the important aspect of there being a choice that one can make, they're talking about, again, to my understanding, the way I teach it, at least, is to the avoidability part of dukkha, meaning changing the habitual patterns of the mind. And this is where restraint is absolutely essential. Restraint of what we are exposing our minds to, our senses to, our eyes to, our ears to. Who are we hanging out with? What type of resources are we benefiting or exposing ourselves to? Resources in this case of, let's say, data. The media is a big one, right? So when I'm suggesting the steering wheel of Nāma-Rupa being crucial for our meditative practice, it goes without saying that there needs to be the restraint element strongly present there. Otherwise, given the negative bias of the mind, of the brain itself, soon enough we're going to be in despair again. And our sense of being aloof or separate from being dragged in to whatever the flavor of the week is, or the horror level or fear factor that we're being fed constantly with what's coming in through the six senses, of what menacing forces are out there, possibilities of more pain, is always going to be pulling us in like a black hole, unless there is restraint. And the Buddha had a term for this. He used to call this dropping the world's bait. Bait. And usually he would refer to the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, for example. But they don't necessarily have to be sensual pleasure. They could be sensual, having to do with the senses, not just sexual, by the way. But anything that pulls us out and away from what needs to be done. Getting to the state of balance. Because we got work to do, folks. We have work to do other than just constantly be running around and fighting with this, fighting with that in our heads. We don't just go after pleasurable states. Of course, we aspire to them. We try to create the conditions for them. However, that is not the goal. The goal is to just cut through the ignorance and be done with this whole mass of suffering. And that's where attachment is a big part. Attachment to our views, wrong views, that is. So even when we understand what dukkha is, what suffering is, that doesn't say much, does it? Who cares, ultimately, if I'm not able to do something with that where I am indeed able to relinquish my connection to the suffering? And what many times goes unnoticed, apparently, is the very important role that views play, the wrong views in the mind. So understanding dukkha, understanding suffering, has everything to do with relinquishing that view and even understanding of the dukkha itself when we're holding on to this, meaning, let's say, the Four Noble Truths. It's very similar to the person who was given a prescription to 100% valid, powerful medicine that targets their illness. So basically, they will be cured if they take the medicine. Now, they have the piece of paper that is the prescription for the medicine. And they go ahead and laminate that, magnify it, Kinkos, make it 10 by 8 feet, carry it over their heads. It's not gonna help. So we need to have the wisdom to let go of the view, because I see it often where we say to ourselves, yes, I understand the Dhamma, yes, I understand the first noble truth, second, third, fourth. But when push comes to shove, how much of the Eightfold Path, the fourth noble truth, am I applying? Am I restricting the free flow traffic of negative thoughts, for example? So there's a lot to do, to digest, to process before we sit to meditate and after. If you notice, I left the middle part, the duration of the meditation. Because vitaka and vichara, or thinking and pondering, can really do a number on us, because thoughts come in, terminologies, vocabulary, Buddhist vocabulary can play in, and we would now be interacting, having these mini monologues with ourselves, and not benefit from the practice of meditation. So, what I am suggesting is, seeing that I'm proposing doing this before meditation and after, this means that I am suggesting for us to make this Dhamma be part and parcel of our lives, not treat it even like a job, as a job, not even treating it as a job where you do the work, but once you're done, you close your laptop, or you're driving back home or whatever, it's done. I've seen so many times where people might discuss Dhamma, this and that, in an official setting, and they get up and go to the bathroom or restroom or eating, get in the car, and all of a sudden it's a different person. What happened? Did Dhamma stop? Now, I'm not saying go ahead and become like an evangelist, in your understanding of Dhamma, and just go ahead, keep talking about it. No, it's not about that. It's an internal process, that the engagement of the mind with this. And this, again, is another reason why the Buddha saw the value of contemplation of death as a crucial part in bringing the mind in the crosshairs. The death is so focused right there, so present. That's what I mean by focused. You're living your life, but it's there. You're not denying its existence, its presence. And based on that inevitability of it, looking at the Nāma-Rupa, our attachment to things, including the Dhamma, because the Dhamma itself can be a hurdle. Even though I started this talk by saying how the Dhamma is our home, yes. Let's remember that scene that is so well known, even by non-Buddhists or people that are not that interested in Buddhism, about the raft, about the boat that is built out of reeds, and the person crosses the tumultuous river, but once they cross over, they don't carry the boat over their head for the rest of their lives or to their home. They just drop it there. That's the wrong view. That's when it becomes wrong view. Even Dhamma can become wrong view for us, wrong view, if we're holding on to it and not benefiting from the life raft. So that's why I see even Nāma-Rupa, the mentality-materiality, and all of these principles, these factors of the dependent origination cycle, as being so porous. They flow into each other, allowing us to get a better grasp of a better understanding of what is this thing, this dynamic thing called life, and how is it related to my experience, or is my experience of life living on the outskirts of the Dhamma, outside of the sphere that is Dhamma, or does it have everything to do with it? To my understanding, it has everything to do with it. So your life is the Dhamma. I would like to leave you with those thoughts and suggestions, and open for comments, questions about your practice and any other issues that are pertinent to you and your living experience right now. Yes, anyone? Yes.
A very great lesson, and I really love the idea of a Dhamma as home. So before I ask you to elaborate on that, I tell you what my understanding of a Dhamma as home. For me, home is, I'm very lucky, I'm by myself at home now, so it is a place where one can really maintain equanimity if one is not dealing with outside world, if I can stay home. So I see that as one of the very important, you focus on your mind and body. But, you know, because I have so many other thoughts, I know I'm not supposed to do that. I also think about the Christian imagery of your body as the temple. So in this case, I feel that home is also where you should always practice the 5 precepts. And so I want to relate this to your talk last time. I learned the 5 precepts, I recite the 5 precepts, but I noticed that you expatiate on the 5th precept very differently. Because for me, I don't drink, so it's very easy. If you to say don't drink alcohol, for me, I don't have to do anything. But I remember what you said last time about any kind of addiction. So in that sense, when you said that do not treat Dharma as a job, I think that even when we think that, okay, I can't go to meditation today because I have a class, it's my duty, I have to take care of my kid, we should also think about, you know, even when we are doing that, this kind of the self, the equanimity, the solitude. But I like you to, in other words, maybe talk a little bit more about both Dharma as home, because you said it's not like necessary to read all the sutra to do that, to integrate, you know, your body as home, and to maybe even relate that to what you said last time. Because I think if we just read the 5 precepts literally, most of us, except for maybe slapping a mosquito, is not hard to follow. But what you said last time is much harder. In other words, any kind of addiction, including maybe watching a TV series. Unfortunately, I don't have any of that. But, you know, sometimes reading a book, even, you know, just want to keep going, you know, a very exciting book. So I just want you to kind of say a little more about what you mean by Dhamma as home. I really like that metaphor. Yes.
That is Dhamma as one's home. It has the flavor of safety, of security, using the atmosphere that you created when you first started with your question as what it means now. Even the facial expressions that you were manifesting was saying a lot about, finally I am in my safety. I'm happy, basically. I'm okay. As long as the door works, the locks work, I'm fine. I'm feeling safe. Well, that is conventional form of safety up to a certain point. Still, flooding can happen, earthquakes happen. Like the other day in California, there was an earthquake. Well, if it hit a little bit stronger, there goes that safety. So when I am mentioning the words that I was inspired by the other day to write down in my journal, where I realized my home is the Dhamma. Wow. Wherever I go, and I'm actually experiencing it as such. I'm carrying it in my heart. I'm carrying it. So when a person is saying that, you really don't have to be surrounded by 4 walls, massive walls or huge spaces, a villa. Then the word home denotes something completely different. Even when your legs are broken, even when every single person that you loved so much, that have granted you countless memories, joyful, loving, beautiful memories that are now bittersweet, and you're left alone, and they're all gone, you're still feeling safe. Our practice of the Dhamma can be that for each of us, to our own capacity, how much we invest of ourselves into it. And this has a lot to do with the practice that we do, where we take the Dhamma from the parentheses that is a job description type, a certain portion of our day that we can only dedicate that much and that's it. Don't ask for more, please. When we take it out of that context and we make it everything about our day, our living experience, that's when we begin to see that the outlines of the Dhamma is becoming very porous again. It's permeating everywhere. Now I'm going to just jump into the other question you had about, or the mention of the fifth precept. Now the fifth precept itself is not just about addiction. Most people think that it's about intoxicants, substances that intoxicate, that dull the mind. Yes, by the way, they are about those, but not just that. You see, in order for us to break any of the other four, including the fifth one, precept, we need to have the mind be intoxicated. Meaning, the mind has to be without a guiding system. It has lost its sense of direction. Its compass is gone. And that's what happens in a person who is inebriated or intoxicated, when they're not there anymore. So they start doing things that they come to regret soon enough. When they become more cognizant of, oh my, they become conscious of their behavior, of their actions. But when a person is being exposed to various substances that dull the mind, that is key to understand. Because unless my mind is dull enough, there's nobody in the driver's seat, basically. The car is doing whatever it wants. Then I can go ahead and kill someone. Then I can go ahead and steal from you. Then I can go ahead and steal your mate, or cheat behind my mate. And I can do anything. I can say whatever that comes to my lips. Why? Because it is now, there's no restraint. So the mind has to be, on some level, incoherent, lost its balance, which is another way that I understand the intoxication of the mind, which is specifically categorized within the fifth precept. However, I see it being present in all of the others as well. Because the mind that is not dull cannot take anything that is not freely given. Something must compel it to. The logic or the rational mind must be hushed. And the only thing that can hush it are, or the things that can hush it are, the three defilements: greed, hatred, and delusion. Meaning, they are running the show. Meaning, the selective, aware, and responsible, meaning right view, is not in the driver's seat of one's mind. Most of us are in that state now, because information is coming in willy-nilly. We're just going by our impulses. So basically, all of us are now, as a population of this planet, to some degree intoxicated. Not necessarily with alcohol. So we need to draw the line, at least to self-protect, And that's when we can actually protect our neighborhoods, our loved ones, the world, by at least making sure that this person behind the mirror is run properly, not crashing into anyone. So I hope that helps.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I've asked this question before. I tend to ask the same questions in different formats. But no, your talk was very useful in shedding light. My question was, I guess I get confused. I think about the COVID, and then I think about karma, and then I think about care. So I asked myself, okay, it seems to be a differential kind of, well, at least say in the U.S., it seems that minorities, populations, or people who are working class, people who are essential workers, they have higher rate of COVID and also of death, of mortality. And then, of course, then I think, is it like a class karma or a collective karma? Number one. Then number two, I think of, okay, the level of care. Certain communities have much less access. So then they have much less level of care, which leads to, more dire consequences. So I was trying to figure out how to look at it in a, I guess, kind of a Buddhist way, but I couldn't quite put it together.
Yes, the karma does play a role, and it has different levels. I remember myself having gone over this, but this is such a crucial part of our understanding of life. The role of kamma, and the way the Buddha describes it is wonderful. However, unfortunately, because it's such a vast, detailed, complex spiritual algorithm, if you want to call it, it's only something that can be deciphered precisely, adequately, appropriately by a Buddha. Now, having said that, that's the caveat. The other thing is the individuals or the groupings that you mentioned, for example, the individuals who are dying of COVID, the individuals who are in the essential worker category, or like caretakers, hospital workers, they're also being exposed to, obviously, from consistent exposure to it, and other diseases. Let's not, fool ourselves. There's other diseases that have been going on before last January or last December, right? So now the highlight is on COVID, of course. Everybody's camera is on that, everybody's mic is on that, so that is the preponderant disease or virus. So there's that population. Yes, there is a cumulative, there's a population base, there is not even population, because some part of the population might be, big chunk of it might be exposed to extreme hardship and social justice way of looking at it. We might say this is so unjust, unfair, etc. Whereas, while at the same time, the same population, people who fit the category of that population, you look at them from a different angle. Those people, those individuals are completely immune. In fact, they're in much better shape than you and I. So that takes the karmic, using my earlier word, algorithm to a different level. Now we're talking about a different subsection of the karmic influence that hits a certain population. Let's say you have you've had minorities who are in incredibly difficult situations, but then you have members of those same minorities living as billionaires, healthy, or not even billionaires, but very, very healthy, healthier than you, healthier than I. So then we are talking about, so yes, a very short answer would be an absolute yes for the karmic part. Now, but these are not like at the lowest rung of, you know, being heavily karmically hit. For example, for a long time, there are people on this planet right now that are being hit much harder than COVID. We don't even talk about them. The mass population of the planet doesn't even know that this is happening. For example, just let me throw this out there, population of Yemen. You're not even seeing it on the news. Kids are dying of hunger. They're dying of diseases. While at the same time, there is constant bombardment, explosions, rockets falling on their heads, and they do not have a voice. They're not on the media. Now, their karma is far worse than the minorities that we see around us who are suffering. You know, we're focusing our attention on COVID, but the rest of the world, and when I say world, other aspects of illnesses and other unfair treatment of populations are still continuing on. We don't even hear about it. Why? Because this is the primary focus that we have on. I have friends and ethnically, as I've mentioned in the past, my grandparents are Armenian. So there's a small country in Eastern Europe somewhere. It's called Armenia. Somehow it's still there. Now it's being constantly threatened. Now they have a very bad case of COVID there that they're having a hard time controlling, while at the same time there is physical military threat to be attacked. And the other day, one of the marauding government threatened the population of Armenia that it was going to attack the only nuclear reactor that they have so that it can destroy it, as if that's going to be localized only there. We don't hear about this. People in Africa. So yes, kamma is a big part, but it has different layerings. And I personally don't think that there are coincidences. For every action, there's a reaction, right? It's a very umbrella term. But in Buddhism, there's different ways that we can map out. Unfortunately, our hands are tied as far as getting exact link-ups as to what was the thing that this population, these people, this individual did in order for them to be walking in this long line of people that's heading towards, well, the firing squad for no reason, apparently. So as far as the Dhamma is concerned, there are no innocent people, innocent children. Yes, in this life, when we look at them, we see, well, how come this child has done nothing? Of course they're innocent. How could you say that they're not innocent? Yes, absolutely. When we look at it from this frame of reference. But as far as the Dhamma is concerned, because we're looking at it in multiple layers of existences that this person has lived, I've shared with you personally how in my own life, I was 8 years old. I hadn't cut off anybody's toes. I hadn't cut open somebody's head. These things happened to me. My childhood was gone. I didn't have a teenage life. Technically, I was innocent, but no. As far as the Dhamma's explanation goes, I wasn't. Actions were committed for which there were repercussions. And this is why some people calling themselves secular Buddhists, some of them, who completely deny the role of kamma and vipāka, which is the fruits of the kamma or actions committed, are making a major mistake in their understanding of what the Dhamma is. Because we remove the role of kamma and vipāka, the root fruits of it, then we are now holding on to this thing called wrong view. Because it leaves a huge gap in our understanding, and now we have to fill up the gap with something. And that eliminates the Eightfold Path, because we've taken a big chunk out, which is the first one, which is right view, samadhi. You remove that, everything falls apart. So that would be something that I would attempt to try and answer your question with. Sorry, it was long-winded. I apologize.
Oh, no. It's one of those questions, and also it's a tough answer. So that means that even in nations or countries who are not Buddhist, like probably Armenia, or say, many other countries, the principles of where karma still might apply, even though there may not be that particular word for it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I totally. Yes. Because it doesn't matter. Like, we're all breathing air. Whether the skin color is one thing or another. I see it similarly. Any other, I hope, yes, please.
Can you hear me okay?
Could you increase the mic, or?
I'll get a little closer. Is that okay now?
Yes.
So thank you for your talk today. I was listening to you speak about Nāma-Rupa. And I realized that the illusion that I have a self has come from consciousness, because I think I'm conscious, then I exist. Now, hearing you speak about Nāma-Rupa today, I started to think that maybe that's the wrong idea, and that the I that's the illusion really is the reality and the mentality. So, first of all, I wonder if you can comment on where the illusion of the I comes from. Is it Nāma-Rupa? And I have read a while ago about the vortex of consciousness and Nāma-Rupa, and I have to go back and read that now. But while we're here, I'm wondering, in the short time that we have left, if you can give me a little bit your definition of what consciousness is, because I think I don't understand it correctly in the way that how our self arises.
Thank you. It's a very specific question. I appreciate it. And it's one that I've struggled with quite some time, as to what is consciousness, especially because Buddha breaks it down into 6. And we see consciousness also showing up as part of the 5 aggregates, which makes up the person, the human being. So what is what? To kind of get an idea. And then you also see it, this is when it becomes a little bit helpful, I'm hoping, to address your question. When we're looking at the Paticcasamuppada, that's when we can see a little bit better the connection between Nāma-Rupa and with consciousness. Because once we do have these two, there is the facility for sense perceptions to come in. In fact, Salayatanam come in. Salayatanam are the 6 senses. The doorway, the contact to happen, which is the next phase of the Paticcasamuppada. Now, to give you a very succinct way of defining, rather, of consciousness, the way I like to see it now, that does not complicate things for me and for others, is sense awareness. Consciousness is sense awareness. So it leaves out the philosophical underpinnings of it, when I can relate it to something that I can have it's more tangible for me to understand consciousness instead of it being such an ephemeral, such a foggy, such a out there thing which makes up who, quote unquote, I am, right? So sense awareness for me, it becomes a little more palatable. Now, sense awareness, again, we need to understand it in the context of the six senses, including the mind. The mind is a sensory organ in the Dhamma, according to the Buddha's teachings. That's how we can cognize, that's how we can know a thought, a memory, a concept. Now, one of the concepts that we hold on to, unfortunately, and by the way, if you've already gathered, the sixth of the six senses, meaning the mind, mano-vijnana, actually holds more clout, is the most powerful among all six. Some people think it's the eyes because we get most of our information through the eyes, right? But the mind is the most powerful sense organ because of your eyes might be shut, but the thoughts are all over the place. Many people try to sleep, but they can't because the mind is all over the place with thoughts, ideas. In fact, in the Vammika Sutta, which is the anthill, Sutta number 23, Buddha, there's a scenario where a Deva, Brahma, comes in and talks with Venerable Kumara Kassapa, and he gives him a riddle. The riddle is, there is this anthill that is fuming by day and fuming by night. And the Brahmin comes in, he says, and guides the wise disciple, etc. But I don't want to go. It's a beautiful sutta, and the reason why I picked it out in my head right now because I was going over it recently, but it deals with the fuming by day, fuming by night. It's the mano-vijnana, the consciousness element, the mind consciousness that has taken on all this information during the day, that this is mine, this is who I am, these are my thoughts, these are my feelings, how come the world is treating me this way, and whatnot. That is playing constantly, including aham asmi, which is I am. The delusion, the wrong view of I am, aham asmi, the Buddha calls it. This is who I am. Therefore, completely negating, completely ignoring the principles of the dependent origination. And hence the importance of us to go over step by step to kind of look, at least graphically, at least just look at the diagram and play it in our heads. Because there's this different narrative framework that we use, especially when we're coming from a Judeo-Christian background, Western culture, an understanding of an I, what we understand as our ego. And we try to squeeze it into the Dhamma, the principles of the teachings, and they don't fit, which requires, like you've eloquently stated, to look at it differently given the new information that comes in this case, Nāma-Rupa. In fact, the Buddha talks about Nāma-Rupa leading to consciousness and consciousness being directly linked to Nāma-Rupa. So they almost like an infinity sign. I see an infinity sign there. And it's like, to use a metaphor, it would be like the candle that is lit. We can say the candle gives off light, but candle also is a heat source. So which one is it? It's both. And a human being has both. Nāma-Rupa and consciousness as the drive, the impetus to make other things happen, like contact, thanks to the six sense spaces, which leads us to the big one, which keeps us in samsara, and that is craving. Am I in the ballpark of trying to answer your question? I'm giving you an answer.
Thank you. That's a great answer so far. The question that's still rolling around in my mind as I listen to you is, the part about where mind comes in. You mentioned that because the mind base doesn't come into play in the 12 links until after consciousness and Nāma-Rupa. So we have that vortex of consciousness in Nāma-Rupa, but we don't have the mind until later. So how can mind be sensing all of that because it doesn't exist yet?
Yes. Now, I will ask you to kind of pull the camera back further and to look at what's in front of us a little bit wider to see what's out there. Meaning, if we go by the Paticca-samuppada, we see that it technically starts with ignorance, right? And then we get sankharas. Well, where did sankharas come from? Because they are also mind-based. In a sense, they are generative causes or formations or volitional formations or fabrications or preparation, whatever you pick from that. They're all used to describe sankharas. I personally like to call generative causes, but they're still mind stuff. So when we're looking at the cycle or the circle of Paticca-samuppada, again, our way of looking at things is the brain is very linear often in trying to conjure up concepts and try to link things up. A happens, that's why we get a B. That's why, eventually when we see D, we know that there's got to be a C somewhere. Well, why? We're thinking in linear fashion. But when you're sitting to practice meditation, many of it is multidimensional. Now I'm getting into metaphysics, which is not what got me interested in Theravada in the first place. So because it doesn't have those things as much, But that's where Abhidharma came in, because these are philosophical questions which the Buddha avoided. And he always went back to the very basic experience of living. And I mean, of course, he had some formulas to give. In some suttas, you actually see the Buddha giving not 12 links, but 9, in some cases less. So given the depth of the description, I think he drew the line at 12. I'm sure, there were instances where people were having arguments. One of them was Ananda, and the other one was a woodworker, a carpenter, who was well-versed, a layperson. And they were arguing on how many types of feelings the Buddha had described. Venerable Ananda was saying, giving a number. The carpenter was giving another number. So they have this back and forth argument until finally they decide to go to the Buddha. And the Buddha says, he's right and you're right. Huh? Well, the Buddha says in different contexts, I've described it as 3 feelings. In other times, I've described it as 9, 18, until it's 108. Something like that. So I am inviting you to, to consider not being just localized with one word in understanding consciousness, or where it should fit, or where it should fall. Like sankhara, for example, where how about ignorance? Ignorance in reference to what? What can be ignorant or not? We're still talking about the mind, even though it comes later in the cycle, right? Is this helping?
This is wonderful, thank you.
Oh. Yes. Well, we're over and our time, but this was a lovely opportunity to share the Dhamma, and thank you for being here. And once the Wi-Fi starts working normally again, I'm going to be able to actually upload this talk so that you can go back to it as necessary. So let's close by sharing of merits. I'll say it in English. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired, for the achievement and acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.